4 years ago, in the private bar of Chicago's Langham Hotel, a woman Bastian Alcott had trusted pressed her lips to his cheek and nearly killed him. The compound had been synthetic, untraceable, absorbed through his skin within seconds. He had collapsed before reaching the elevator. His security team had revived him on the marble floor while the woman vanished into the city like smoke. She was never found. Since that night, Bastian Alcott had not allowed a single ungloved hand to touch his skin. The city called him the Ghost Ledger, the man who controlled the financial architecture beneath Chicago's criminal underworld without leaving fingerprints on a single transaction. At 34, he was violently wealthy, surgically precise, and profoundly alone. He occupied the top 2 floors of a Streeterville high-rise with reinforced glass walls and a private elevator that required his biometric signature to move. His hands were always covered, black calfskin in winter, thin silk in summer. He shook no hands. He accepted no drinks he hadn't opened himself. He kept the world at exactly the distance required to stay alive. The only exception was Lily. Lily Alcott was 6 years old and had not spoken a single word in 11 months. She had been placed in Bastian's custody after his younger sister, Renata, died of an accidental overdose in a motel room on the South Side. Lily had been asleep on the bed 3 feet away when it happened. She had woken up and tried to shake her mother awake for 40 minutes before a housekeeper found them. No one knew exactly what the girl remembered. She simply stopped talking. The best child psychologists in the city had come to the high-rise one after another and left without progress. Lily would not make eye contact with anyone. She carried a battered stuffed rabbit everywhere and spent most of her days sitting at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the lake. Bastian watched her watch the water and felt, for the first time in his adult life, completely helpless. The nannies, 6 of them, all credentialed, all expensive, had lasted between 9 days and 3 weeks. They crumbled under the combination of Lily's silence and the suffocating atmosphere of the Alcott household. The most recent one had quit by text at 7 in the morning on a Monday, the message consisting of exactly 12 words. By 7:15, Bastian's operations director had posted a private listing. The salary offered was obscene. Gemma Portillo did not look like someone who belonged in a penthouse. She arrived on a Thursday morning with a canvas tote over one shoulder, her dark hair coming loose from a braid she had clearly redone in the lobby, wearing a blazer that fit her well across the shoulders but pulled at the buttons when she breathed too deeply. She was 28 years old, a size 18 on a good day, with thick thighs and a full face that flushed when she was nervous, which she was, standing in the private elevator while Yusuf Karen, Bastian's head of security, studied her like an active threat assessment. She stared back. "Do you always audit the nanny candidates in the elevator, or is today special?" Yusuf did not smile. He also did not answer. She had been a special education teacher for 4 years, specializing in children with selective mutism and trauma-induced language delays, before Chicago Public Schools' budget cuts had eliminated her position in April. Her brother Marco was 32 and had been on the kidney transplant list for 8 months. Their mother's insurance had rejected the surgery twice, classifying it as non-urgent. Gemma had $300 in her checking account and a brother running out of time. She had found the listing through a private agency contact and applied at 11 at night, sitting on the floor of her Logan Square apartment, half convinced it was a scam. It was not a scam. She stepped out of the elevator into a foyer that felt like a museum, polished concrete floors, a 20-foot ceiling, walls of glass overlooking Lake Michigan in every shade of winter gray, and at the far end of the room, descending an open staircase, was Bastian Alcott. He was tall and angular, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that fit like a second skin. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a pale, unsettling green that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore black leather gloves. She noticed those first. "Miss Portillo," he said. His voice was low and measured, the kind that did not raise itself for anyone. You came recommended through Dr. Hassan's office. I did, Gemma said. She did not elaborate. She had learned early that over-explaining in interviews was a form of self-sabotage. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not approval, but recalculation. Like he had expected a different response and was adjusting. Before either of them could continue, there was movement at the top of the stairs. A small shape barely visible behind the railing. Lily stood there in a yellow sweater, holding her rabbit by one ear, staring down at the large, unfamiliar woman standing in her living room. Gemma looked up. She didn't wave, didn't put on a performance of warmth. She looked at the girl for a long, unhurried moment, then turned back to Bastian. She's been up there the whole time, Gemma said. It wasn't a question. His jaw tightened. She doesn't engage with visitors. She's engaged right now. He looked up. Lily had descended exactly 4 steps and was sitting on one of them, watching Gemma with the careful attention of an animal deciding whether something new was safe. Gemma turned back to him. I'd like to sit on your floor. A pause. I beg your pardon. Not on the furniture. The floor. Children who've stopped trusting adults respond better when you make yourself smaller than them. It's not complicated. She was already setting her bag down, if that's all right. Bastian looked at Yusuf. Yusuf's face said there was no established protocol for this. Bastian looked back at Gemma and said nothing, which she took as permission. She lowered herself cross-legged onto the concrete, unzipped her bag, and pulled out a small picture book worn at the spine, a rabbit on the cover. She opened it in her lap and began reading. Not performing, not projecting her voice toward the stairs. Reading quietly as though she were alone. 40 seconds passed. Lily came down the remaining stairs and sat on the bottom step, close enough to see the pictures. Bastian Alcott stood in the center of his own living room and felt something tighten in his chest, with no business doing so. You have the position, he said. His voice came out slightly rougher than intended. Gemma looked up from the book. We haven't discussed terms. Triple whatever the agency quoted you. Your brother's surgical evaluation at Northwestern will be scheduled by my medical coordinator within 48 hours, all associated costs handled. He watched her face go very still. I conduct thorough research on anyone who enters this building. The transplant situation was noted. She held his gaze for a long moment. Lily was watching too, rabbit pressed to her chest. There are rules, Bastian said, stepping closer so she had to tilt her head back to hold eye contact. You do not ask questions about my business. You do not bring anyone onto this floor. You do not access the West Corridor under any circumstances. He stopped close enough that she could see the fine grain of the leather on his gloves. And you do not attempt physical contact with me. Ever. Do we understand each other? Gemma looked at his gloves, then back at his eyes. Her cheeks were pink, her chin was level. Understood, she said. Then she looked down at the book, turned a page and kept reading. 7 weeks changed the penthouse in ways that couldn't be catalogued on any maintenance report. The kitchen, which had previously produced only catered food in white boxes, now smelled like butter and cinnamon on Saturday mornings. Lily's room had acquired a small collection of picture books stacked in a specific order the girl had arranged herself. There was a star chart taped to the hallway wall at a slight angle, deliberately crooked. Bastian had eventually realized, because Gemma had put it up that way so Lily would fix it. Lily had fixed it on the 3rd day. Bastian monitored all of it through the building's internal cameras. He told himself it was security protocol. He watched the feeds on his laptop during calls, during meals, at 11 at night when he should have been reviewing financial documents. He watched Gemma make Lily's breakfast while narrating everything she was doing in a low, unhurried voice. Not demanding a response, just filling the silence with something warm. He watched her sit beside the windows with the girl for an hour at a stretch, both of them looking at the water. He watched her laugh, a real laugh, loud enough to carry through the walls at something a morning news anchor said. He had not watched this building's cameras this obsessively since the first month after the Langham poisoning, when every shadow felt like a rehearsal for his death. He understood the difference. That was what unsettled him. He wanted to know whether her skin was as warm as it looked when the kitchen light caught her arms. He shut the thought down with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything else. He was not a man who reached for things he could not safely hold. He had made his peace with that particular truth a long time ago. The peace ended on a Tuesday night in late November. A storm system rolled off Lake Michigan with almost no warning, 70-mile-an-hour gusts and horizontal sleet that tripped a transformer station 4 blocks away. At 10:47 p.m., the penthouse went dark. The backup systems should have engaged in 3 seconds. They didn't. Yusuf's voice came through the emergency radio immediately. A coordinated cyber attack had hit the building's secondary power grid. Someone with significant resources and a focused grudge had planned this night carefully. Bastian was at his private study desk when the lights died. He was already reaching for the handgun in the desk drawer before the radio finished crackling. Gemma was in the kitchen, halfway through her second cup of tea, when darkness dropped over everything. For 1 second she processed the situation. Then her brain produced a single word: Lily. Lily was terrified of the dark. Gemma had discovered this on day 4, when a fuse had blown in the girls' bathroom, and Lily had pressed herself against the wall and shaken without making a sound, trembling hard enough that the rabbit in her arms had trembled with her. Total silence was Lily's version of screaming. Gemma was already moving. The kitchen windows let in enough ambient city light to get her to the hallway. She knew the apartment's east side. She had walked it every night for 7 weeks. She moved fast, one hand trailing the wall, bare feet quiet on the floor. She miscounted the doors in the dark. She was moving too fast, adrenaline overriding spatial memory, and the corridor bent 2 degrees differently in the dark than it did in her mental map. She reached what she was certain was the junction to Lily's wing, pushed through the door with her shoulder, and stepped onto carpeting that didn't belong to that hallway. She didn't know it yet. She moved another 4 steps before her shin connected with something solid, the edge of a low leather bench, and her forward momentum carried her with nothing to grab. She went down hard, all of her, landing against something that was not furniture. It was a person. The impact took the breath out of her completely. She was sprawled forward, hands instinctively flat against whatever she had landed on, and what her palms registered was a solid, warm chest and the sharp sound of an inhale in the dark. Every cell in her body froze. "Oh God," she breathed. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm looking for Lily. The lights died and she's afraid of the dark and I went the wrong. Don't move." The voice was very quiet and very controlled, which somehow made it worse than a shout would have. Gemma went completely still. Her bare hands were flat on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, fast, much faster than his voice suggested. Her own pulse was hammering in her ears. She became acutely, painfully aware of the full weight of her body against his, the warmth radiating through his shirt, the fact that his hands were not pushing her away. She realized, somewhere below the panic, that the gloves were gone. His bare palms were at his sides. "Mr. Alcott," she said, very quietly, "I need to find Lily, please. She doesn't cry when she's frightened. She just goes silent. And in this building, in the dark." "I know." A pause. Something shifted in the quality of his silence. Something deliberate, like a decision being made in real time. Then, carefully, she felt his hands move, not to push her back. His bare palms settled flat against her sides, slow and deliberate, as though he was learning the weight of something he had been afraid to hold for a very long time. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe. The backup power came on, not the building system, but a secondary isolated generator Yusuf had triggered manually. Light flooded the corridor. Gemma found herself looking directly up into Bastian Alcott's pale green eyes at a distance of 6 inches, her hands on his chest, his hands curved around her sides over the soft fabric of her sweatshirt. For 2 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then Yusuf's voice shattered it. Perimeter breach, east stairwell, 3 hostiles armed, moving toward the child's wing. Gemma was on her feet before Bastian had finished processing the sentence. She was already moving toward the east corridor. He caught her arm at the junction, pulling her behind the wall as a flashlight beam swept the far end of the hallway. He pressed her back with one arm across her chest, his body between her and the corridor. She could feel him vibrating with something coiled and controlled. "There are at least 3 of them," he said, his mouth at her ear. "They are not here for information." "Then why?" "Because someone monitors my financial transfers. They saw 8 months of significant wire payments to a transplant program at Northwestern. They drew conclusions." His voice was flat and steady. "They came tonight because I paid for your brother's surgery. They believe that means you matter to me." A beat, Gemma absorbed this. "Lily is in the East Wing," she said. "I know." "Then we are done talking." She moved. He followed, not to pull her back, but to flank her, a second weapon already in his bare hand, clearing each junction ahead while she navigated the layout she had memorized in 7 weeks of bedtime routines and midnight water runs and early mornings with the lake light coming through those windows. Her lungs burned, her thighs ached. Bastian slowed without being asked, his bare hand finding hers in the dim corridor and gripping it, not directing, not restraining, just holding, like she was the only fixed point in the building. She held him back just as hard. They reached Lily's wing. A man in tactical gear was moving through the doorway with a flashlight sweeping ahead of him. Gemma was 3 steps ahead of Bastian, and she didn't stop to calculate. She drove herself sideways into the man with the full force and weight of her body, hitting him at the shoulder, sending him hard into the doorframe. The flashlight clattered, the gun swung wide. Bastian was there within a second, and the man dropped. Gemma crossed the room on her knees, ignoring the pain in her shins. Lily, it's Gemma. I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." Silence from the closet. Then the smallest possible sound, almost nothing. Gemma pulled the closet door open. Lily was curled at the very back, rabbit pressed against her face, her whole small body shaking without making a sound. Gemma lowered herself to the floor with a soft grunt that she didn't try to hide and gathered the girl fully into her arms, one hand over the back of her head, tucking her against her chest. "I've got you," Gemma said. "You're okay. I came for you. I've got you." Lily's fists closed on the fabric of Gemma's sweatshirt and did not open. Bastian stood in the doorway, weapon lowered, and watched them. The controlled violence still running through him had nowhere to go. Everything in the room was calm. Lily, who had not voluntarily touched another human being in 11 months, was buried in Gemma's arms and holding on. He had not felt anything knock the composure out from under him since the Langham. He felt it now. The building was fully secured by 4 in the morning. Yusuf's team worked the aftermath with the efficient silence that Bastian paid them to maintain. No local authorities were contacted. In the underground safe room, Lily had finally surrendered to exhaustion against Gemma's side on the long leather sofa, the rabbit tucked under her chin, one small fist still loosely curled in Gemma's sleeve even in sleep. Gemma sat very still, not wanting to disturb her. She had a bruise forming on her shoulder and drywall dust in her hair, and the hollow, shaky feeling that follows an adrenaline crash. She stared at the concrete wall and thought about nothing in particular. Bastian came in quietly and closed the heavy door. He had changed into a clean shirt, sleeves rolled back. His hands were bare. He crossed the room and crouched on the floor directly in front of her. "The threat has been permanently addressed," he said. His voice was different here, lower, stripped of the professional edge. "Marco's security detail at Northwestern has been doubled. No one will get near him." Gemma looked at him. Her eyes were exhausted and completely unguarded. "This happened because of me, Because you paid for his surgery and someone found out. This happened because I have spent 15 years accumulating enemies and operating in a world that punishes anything that looks like vulnerability. He held her gaze. You are not the variable that caused tonight. You are the variable that ended it. She looked at his bare hands. He let her look. 4 years, she said quietly. Yes. Without. Yes. She was silent for a moment. The safe room hummed around them. Lily's breathing was slow and even. I'm sorry, Gemma said finally. Whatever happened, that you needed to do that. He reached out slowly, deliberately slowly, so she could see the motion coming, and covered her hands with both of his. She didn't pull back. Her hands were warm, softer than anything he'd let himself imagine in all the weeks he'd been not imagining it. I have spent 4 years building a life with no unpredictable variables in it, he said, and then you sat down on my concrete floor and opened a rabbit book and undid the entire architecture in 7 weeks. He pressed her hand slightly in his. I want you to understand that I know exactly what that means. Gemma looked at him for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was careful. I'm not. Don't, he said, not unkindly. Don't tell me what you are or aren't. I've been watching you for 7 weeks. I know what you are. He turned her hands over slowly in his, studying them. You are the woman who threw herself at an armed man to protect a child who doesn't belong to you. You are the woman, my niece, who has not voluntarily touched another person in nearly a year, will not let go of, even in her sleep. He looked up at her. I have excellent judgment about what matters. It is, genuinely, the only reason I have survived this long. Lily stirred slightly, her small hand tightening on Gemma's sleeve, even in sleep. Gemma looked down at her, then back at Bastian. Something in her expression shifted, the last bit of armor coming down, because there was nothing left to protect it with. The part where I fell on you, she said. I really am sorry about that. I'm not, he said. She laughed, a small, unguarded sound that surprised them both, and made the corner of his mouth move in something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood. He rose, drawing her gently upright so as not to wake Lily. She came up easily, her full soft weight settling close to him, and he kept her hands in his and did not let go. Through the reinforced walls, the city was tilting toward dawn. He did not reach for the gloves. He had no intention of reaching for them. The fortress Bastian Alcott had constructed over 4 years of fear had not been breached by the men with guns. It had been breached by a woman who sat down on his floor, opened a worn picture book, and simply waited. He brought her hands up and pressed his lips to her knuckles, bare skin to warm skin. For the first time in 4 years touching someone and feeling nothing but the solid, undeniable reality of her. Lily slept on. The lake outside turned silver with the coming morning. And Bastian Alcott, who had not held on to anything in a very long time, held on.